So we're in part 3 of an 8-part series on being the change, looking at our 7 principles plus the proposed 8th principle and trying to figure out how can we do that in the everyday. So as we begin this 3rd installment, again, I'm going to take us to the UU congregation of Miami, and they have a short little video that they prepared on the 3rd principle that I'm going to use to set up our time today on being the change in the 3rd principle. So momentarily on the screens, we're going to have a message from the UU congregation of Miami.
The 3rd principle is acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. This principle basically breaks into 3 parts. It's acceptance of one another, the 2nd part being encouragement to spiritual growth, and the 3rd part being encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. I'll be reading an excerpt from Reverend Rob Hardy's from All Souls Church Unitarian in Washington, D.C. He says spiritual growth isn't about a vertical ascent to heaven, but about growth in every dimension at once. It's spiritually in 3D. Growth in spirit doesn't measure one's proximity to God above, but rather the spaciousness of one's own soul, its volume, its capacity, its size. We need souls that can take in the world in all its complexity and diversity, yet still maintain our integrity. And we need souls that can love and be in relationship with all of this complexity. Instead of fight or flight, we need a spiritual posture of embrace. Our congregation is located in one of the most diverse communities in the world, Miami, Florida. We support things like Black Lives Matters, environmental issues, and LGBTQ+. If you're looking for a different type of spiritual journey, join us by emailing our Reverend Tom Capo at revcapo@gmail.com. That's REVCAPO@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube by just typing in UU Miami. Thank you for joining us. Take care. The 3rd principle is
of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. When we were putting this video clip together and figuring out how we were going to use it in the service, Pam asked the question, should we stop the video early before she gave the reverends information and their contact information? And I said, no, leave it in because I'm going to talk about it. So here we go. I'm going to talk about it. So one of the things I just observed when I was watching that is that one of the things that they were attempting to do in that video is give information and also give an invitation. They gave information in the video on the 3rd principle and an invitation. So I just allowed that extra part to play because one of the things that we're engaged in here at this particular time is revisioning and reimagining what we're going to be as a fellowship and how we're going to be as a fellowship, and looking to that little 2-minute example of what is possible in sharing information and exploring the principles. I just want that to sit and percolate in your mind. But going back to what they said, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our community. And the young lady in the video talked about a spaciousness of one's own soul, the value, capacity, and size to take in this whole world. And we've had some conversations together where we've talked about the challenges of accepting other people, especially others that are different from us. So acceptance of one another. When I was in law school, one of the first classes that they require you to take as a first-year law student is constitutional law. And I had a classmate in my constitutional law class who, I'll say that I thought he was like a neo-Nazi. He was on a different wavelength than myself. And he thought I was a communist or a socialist or a communist socialist, but we definitely had two very different views of the world, the Constitution. And an interesting thing happened. He invited me. Mike before service was talking about his birthday, and he got a bottle of scotch. And this gentleman, Patrick, he invited me out for a glass of scotch. And we had about 10 glasses of scotch. But about glass number 8, we had been talking, and I didn't think he was so much of a Nazi anymore, and he didn't think I was so much of a communist anymore. But what it required was for the conversation and maybe the easing of the 8 glasses of scotch to get us there. But through the conversation, we realized that we were both seeking a very similar goal in terms of our vision of the world and what we wanted it to be, and had very different paths to the same goal. But we were at the very beginning caught up in just talking about the pathways and the view that we have of the path. And we weren't able to find any commonality. But again, I highly encourage those 8 glasses of scotch, because what we were able to do is we were able to get to a point where we realized that at least we had something in common, which was the goal, even though that the method that we were seeking was very different. And it reminds me of the last time we were together. I asked some questions, and Rachel said that if she knew that someone was going to die at the end of the day, she would enjoy the dinner with them and celebrate them on their way out. Boy, Tucker, you're having a rough time out there. But I'm curious, because what we're looking to do in this series is challenge ourselves in the day-to-day of accepting one another. And in this principle, it talks about the end brings it together, the encouragement to spiritual growth in our community. So I asked a question, and then put you guys on the spot. If you would be so kind as to raise your hand if you have an answer to this thought. But and now I have Pam being geared up because she realizes that I didn't talk about this in our pre-planning for today's service. But the question is just this. What do you do living in Orange County and being someone who might have a liberal political or a liberal religious perspective? You have a very frequent opportunity to engage with people who have different viewpoints. And so my first question is, what is it that you do, and how often do you make an attempt to accept people other than yourselves? Does anybody have anything that they do when engaging at work, in the community, with a difficult person or a person that's outside of your viewpoint? Rachel has a thought.
We recently combined households. We live in my mother's house, which is a triplex. And so
I'm going to send it to Rachel. So Rachel and her family, they've recently just consolidated, and they're living in her mother's triplex. And the story is going to pick up from there in just a second.
And we're just going to test for a sec. It sounds like it's okay. Okay, Rachel, here you are. Sorry about that.
and so that's you, Brian. No? Anyway, on a daily basis, we are challenged because our daughter married a very conservative, conspiratorial believer and who now thinks Trump is too conservative, but wears T-shirts around the house that support MAGA and things like that. So we're challenged on a daily basis to look for what we have in common and what he offers to our daughter and to the family versus his political beliefs. And mostly we avoid that subject, but we just try to look at who he is as a human being and that he's making our daughter Haven happy. And that's what matters most.
Looking for the commonalities.
Yeah, or at least that he tries to be kind to the grandkids in Haven, and then, you know, as a family member, what he can contribute and not getting into the politicals. But it's sometimes very challenging, especially when he wears those T-shirts. Anyone else?
I have something.
Go ahead.
I have a longtime friend who her family, she grew up very on the other side, the Republicans, conservative, and I grew up with a lot more like science information. And the way that we kind of decided without really doing it is we just decided not to talk politics with each other and just found like that we were friends without doing that, because that would have been really hard.
Thank you for sharing. I heard a commonality in both Rachel share and with our share is that there's a requirement to avoid certain subjects. And so, we got there.
Hold on a sec, let me add here. So I think the one other thing that I try to do when I'm interacting with someone who I know I have points of disagreement on, and maybe important points of disagreement, is someone taught me long ago, try to find, even if it's a small piece, something about that person or how they interact, what they do that you really respect. And keep that in forefront of your mind when you're interacting with them. And it's been interesting to me. Sometimes that's challenging to put in place, but I have found that I almost always find at least one aspect of each person I interact with that I really do respect. And that helps me have a more productive conversation with them, even about the points that we disagree on. So that's what I do.
So up at Starr King in our classes, there's been a lot of conversation about welcoming communities, welcoming congregations, and what does that mean and what does that look like? And I want to bring that into the frame of acceptance of one another, because and for everyone who didn't share, I hope that at least an instance or an individual came to mind. And so here's the question, and that you might not have an answer that you're able to share, but what if that person were to come in our door next Sunday? How would you interact with them in the relationship of this space? If it was the difficult friend or a difficult person, how would you welcome them into this space, or how would you deal with them if they were to show up in this space? And then the question is not to be answered out loud, but would you actually be willing to welcome them into this space? Is your heart and is your mindset in a space where you would say, yes, I want that T-shirt to come through the door? And if that T-shirt does come through the door, are you going to be able to welcome them into beloved community? So there was the challenge of a spaciousness of one's own soul. You know, what is the value, the capacity, and your size for compassion? And so I think about it just in the context of a welcoming congregation in the context of, in the daily existence of being a proud Unitarian who's out there living the Unitarian ways so that everyone can see the Unitarian light emanating from your eyes as you move down the street. The acceptance of one another. And so for me, it becomes challenging because I think about, well, what if it's a guy who was just walking down Cypress? If you don't know, Cypress is the street that runs in front of our church. He was just running down Cypress. N-word, 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 N-word. How willing am I going to be accepting of him? And what does that say about the size and capacity of my own heart and of my own journey? And so there's something really cool. I'm taking 2 classes. I don't know if you guys remember, but I shared that I had taken a philosophy of feminism class back in 1995. And I thought I had been good for a long time. So one of my classes I'm taking is Latinx theologies. And it's a survey class of the many different Latina schools, different viewpoints. And one, it's very different than my philosophy of feminism class and the viewpoints that were shared. And 2, it's been extremely challenging in the sense that there's so much that I hadn't seen before being exposed to these ladies' words and thoughts. And it's challenging because I'm a little bit ashamed of myself for not being able to see. But one of the coolest things that came out of this class for me so far is the concept of the everyday, lo cotidiano. I might have said that all wrong. Lo cotidiano, lo cotidiano. How close am I, Noreen? I know you can do the Spanish. Lo cotidiano, but I do know that it translates into the everyday. And it's the everyday practice. And in the context of this, it's about the everyday practice of liberation, the everyday practice of seeking to overcome oppression. And I'm thinking about it in the concept of the everyday practice of being accepting of one another. Right? Even sometimes I do 2 weekly groups. I do a weekly group on Monday with you guys for Zoom at noon, and on Wednesdays I do a mental health group. And sometimes people say stuff that is not within my wheelhouse of agreement and thought in both groups. And 25 years ago, I would have been ready to argue and ready to fight, and it wouldn't have created a welcoming space. And so I think it's just very important that, one, we have these 7 principles, and as Unitarians, we don't have a doctrine, we don't have any faith construct that we coalesce around. So what is it that we do have? And what we do have is a desire to be better people. We have a desire to be socially active. It's a thing that makes us cohesive in thought across the country as I come into contact with the distant seminarians. So the spaciousness of your soul, as you go through this next week, as we get ready to go into spring tomorrow as the equinox comes, think about the things that you would like to shed. Think about the things that you would like to plant into this new season, because the spring is about planting and about fostering. So one of the things that we know that we have coming as a fellowship is in May, we're planning to bring Reverend Celia in, and this serves as a quasi announcement to those who haven't heard. And in May, we're going to bring Reverend Celia in, and it's about envisioning what we want to do as a fellowship, kind of as a business plan for the fellowship going forward. And a part of that is really going to be informed and directed by our own internal sense of who we are as the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship and what we seek to be in 5 years and 10 years from now? And the question is, do you have a vision of what you would like this fellowship to be in 5 years or 10 years from now? And if not, I challenge you to put a similar question to yourself and to start to develop a vision, because the future is coming and the future is now. So with that, I'm going to invite Carol